Dr. Kathryn Siegfried-Spellar. She's an associate professor in cyber forensics program in the Department of Computer and Information Technology at Purdue University. She's a member of the Tippecanoe High Tech Crime Unit and special deputy status for the Tippecanoe County Prosecutor's Office to assist with high-tech crime units criminal cases involving internet crimes against children. Wonderful.
Nice.
Back in the Stone Age, I was one of the lead people going, we have to look at technology. And this is like 2004, 2005, before it hit. And everybody was like, you're crazy. And, you know, we saw it happening in England. It was already happening. My good cohort, MSW, Glenn Stutzky, I mean, he took me under his arm. We talked about this. So I think talking about cyberbullying will never kind of go away from us. And thank you for all the work that you've done and pushing it to just a much higher level of where we should be over these last couple of years. So
Thank you.
Kathryn, thank you so very, very much. She's going to tell you things that you think you thought you knew, and then things you don't really want to know.
Yeah.
That's the issues with cyberbullying. So Kathryn, the conversation is yours.
Perfect. Let me see. If I can get this to share here. Okay. And we're going to use this one. Okay. And you think I'd be good at this because I've been doing this all semester while I'm teaching, but I'm still learning, right?
Hey,
so,
you're the tech person.
Well, that's terrifying. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you all today. And I'm still getting used to not having that face-to-face interaction when I'm giving a talk. So hopefully I'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions, and because that's always, of course, my favorite part of this dialogue and discussion. So I'm going to talk about some trends that we've seen in 2020, and also some things that I think that you may not be aware of, or some things that you've never thought about when it comes to cyberbullying. So as we get started, we all know that cyberbullying is a problem. And so I don't need to go into the statistics on that. I don't need to talk about how we've seen an increase due to COVID, because I know that you guys are well aware of that. And you've probably even seen that as parents and educators. But here's a few things that I think you may not know. You may not realize that you are biased, and that goes for parents and educators and even people like myself. So we are all very biased when it comes to trying to evaluate cases involving cyberbullying, and that comes to both the victims and the offenders. And we also tend to blame the victim, and I think that's really important for us to be willing to discuss. And so this has been something with the hashtag #MeToo movement. We've seen sort of this conversation arising related to the idea that we do blame victims, but that also isn't just about individuals that have been sexually assaulted. We see this with all types of criminal behaviors, including cyberbullying or other forms of kind of cyber deviant behavior. And the last thing is something that I want to make sure that I talk about, is that there is something known as self-cyberbullying. We also call it digital self-harm. And so I want to make sure that I get to that topic at the end of today's discussion. And so this isn't necessarily a talk that's going to flow very well. I have sort of these three areas that I really want to make sure that I hit. Self-cyberbullying exists, and it's something that we need to start talking about today. Now, again, what is one thing that we all know? Well, this is where we are today, right? It's 2020, and it has been a difficult year for everybody. And I know that Purdue, we shut down in March, right around spring break, and that gave faculty a week for us to transition to completely online learning. And I know that that was really difficult for our students. And Purdue is one of the most international universities when it comes to the number of undergraduate and graduate students from other countries. And so now we're asking students to try to travel home to places where the borders may be closed or it may not be safe because of the increase in COVID. And so this has been very stressful for all of us. And I think the one thing that we can best do to serve our students is to acknowledge that we are just as stressed out. And every day when I walk into the classroom, with my undergraduate students, I have 120 in one of my classes. And I tell them I'm so grateful to still see them. I'm so grateful to still be in person, and that I too am struggling. And I do weekly check-ins with them as well. And so that was mentioned in our panel I heard during our break, this idea of, making sure that our teachers are checking in with students. And I do the same thing. I have them turn in note cards at the end of the week and let me know how they're feeling and how they're adjusting. And, just because they're quote unquote adults, I have juniors and seniors, and so they are considered upperclassmen. That doesn't mean that they know how to handle this situation any more or less than a freshman or somebody else. And so I think that's always really important to let students know that we are here for them and that we are too struggling in our own maybe different or, kind of similar ways. But I will say, could 2020 get any stranger? My favorite thing about it, and I have to highlight this, was Tiger King. I do think that this was the only thing that got me through quarantine. And so with my students, I always end up somehow bringing this up and making it part of that kind of lighthearted conversation when it comes to what 2020 has really been all about. Well, this is honestly what helped me get through it. But coming back to all seriousness, so we are forced to increase our online presence. And that is all of us. That's teachers and educators and parents and, society in general. And this is regardless of our comfort zone. And I think that's really important to remember that not all of us are used to using technology or used to using technology in a certain way. And so now we're also being forced to use kind of these new platforms that we may or may not be familiar with. And that includes delivering those lesson plans. And we may not realize some of the availability of these different features, such as private chat features, whether or not the camera is on or off. And I know that we still have so many issues when it comes to, our Zoom calls. There's always a faculty member or somebody who's on mute, or there's somebody who, is breaking up. And so I think that, we're still trying to figure this technology out. But because of this, because of our lack of comfort level, even the students may not be necessarily prepared to use these different platforms. And for educators, this is even more complex, right? How are you supposed to know the ins and outs of all of the technology that's available? On any given day, and I'm sure you guys relate to this as well, I'm either on WebEx, I'm on Zoom, sometimes I'm FaceTiming because that's the platform that somebody prefers. We also use Teams as well. And so it makes it difficult when an organization is maybe not consistent. And I've heard that from my students here at Purdue, that every classroom is different. And so some of the classrooms maybe are using certain platforms, and then there's only one classroom that's using something different. And now the students have to juggle, all of these different nuances, and as well as the instructors. And so I think it's really important to remember that it's mentally exhausting for us to do that. And I think that leads to and increases kind of our stress and also our burnout of trying to kind of maintain our knowledge of the different ways in which technology is used. And because of this, then we have to think about the ways students might take advantage of these technologies. So you forget the camera is on. A student might do something embarrassing, such as pick their nose, or maybe they forget that they're not muted and they say something, and now all of a sudden they've embarrassed themselves. And it's really easy to take screenshots during a classroom session virtually. And so now you're able to take screenshots of what somebody's doing or how somebody visually looks, and then share that those pictures online or through text message or how, whatever platform. So again, just some different ways in which we may not be thinking about students are using this technology. So again, students are now also relying on technology to both be our in-person and out of classroom, or in classroom and out of classroom sort of presence. And so previous to this, they would be able to interact much more easily. And I've heard from my students here that it's been very isolating to not be able to see their friends and be able to hang out. And so I think that's why, again, we're seeing that increased use in social media and technology in general, because that's what else is there to do? We have nothing else thanks to COVID. So as a result, we're going to see cyber deviant behaviors increasing. I know today's talk is focusing primarily on cyberbullying, but we saw this as well with sextortion, which is blackmail through sexting, and many other types of criminal behaviors as well, which I'm always happy to discuss during the break or during the questions. And trolling is something that we may not think about. Trolling is a type of cyber aggression, and it is related to cyberbullying. So cyberbullying, we usually target somebody that we know. Trolling is when we tend to target somebody that we don't know. And so it's much more anonymous, and a lot of times it's aggressive in a way that you are kind of playing devil's advocate online, but doing it in a way where it's superficial. The individuals usually don't actually have those attitudes, but they're picking buttons in order to try to upset the individual. There's other types of trolling as well, which you may not be familiar with. One is called rip trolling, which is rest in peace trolling. And these are when individuals target memorial pages and of individuals who have passed away. And so again, with COVID, we're seeing an increase in memorial pages being created for loved ones who have passed away. And so you might now have individuals going online. Again, they may not know, they don't know these people, but they target memorial pages and they create memes and they make posts such as suggesting that the individual deserved to die or that the world is better off without them. And so that's what we call rip trolling. And what we do see from my research is that trolling behaviors are related to cyberbullying, so that if you engage in one, you're statistically more likely to also engage in the other. And so again, I think it's really important for teachers and educators and parents to not just talk about cyberbullying, but make sure we also loop in some of these other forms of cyber aggression, such as trolling behaviors. Now, why would cyberbullying increase? I've kind of mentioned a few of these examples, but we have the increased isolation. We also have some mental health issues that are going to be occurring during this very stressful time. I've heard from the previous talks talking about stressful home environment and maybe that lack of a stable support system. So if the support system was occurring at the school, right, through teachers and mentoring and even through peers and classmates, but when we have moved online, now we're back at home where maybe we don't have that stable support system. And when we talk about mental health issues, we know that depression, mood disorders, and non-suicidal self-injury, also known as NSSI, have increased with our youth over the past decade. And there's a lack of social interaction that can exacerbate, whether or not those students are going to be at higher risk for having mental health issues. And another thing we need to think about is impression management. Impression management is incredibly high with regard to online communication. And so it's this question of who am I? Who we have our young students, our teens, they are not only creating the kind of physical persona of who they are in the quote unquote real world, but they also have these online personas as well. And if you're moving them now completely online, there is going to be a sense of, well, I've lost who I am then in the real world. And now maybe I have to rely much more on my online presence. And so there's a theory that we talk about with Goffman, and it's this idea that we act on a stage. And so even though it feels like the communication that we have through technology is synchronous, right? That it's active and live, it's actually not, right? We're not really chatting in real time. And instead, we can manage that impression that we want to give. We can consider our texts, we can rewrite things, we can edit things. And so because of that, it does lack that authenticity and spontaneous exchange that I think students and all of us are really missing right now. And we also are missing that body language and really understanding how somebody's feeling besides what we're just seeing, even on a face-to-face camera. You can turn your camera on and off if you want to be seen or not seen. And so again, we do have much more control with that impression management. And so coming back to Goffman talks about this being an actor on a stage in a way where we wear many masks. And so it's a way of us distorting reality. And I think it's important to think about how we forget who our authentic self is. And so our authentic self is known as the actual self. The odd self is who we think other people want us to be. And the ideal self is who we think we should be. And again, when we talk about young people, our youth, this right now is very much what they're going through as far as trying to figure out who their true identity is. And again, because we have such a relationship to this kind of cyber world, a lot of times we now have cyber personas, and that may or may not equate to what we see ourselves in the physical world. So just, something to think about as far as maybe some additional stress that might be going on. And again, all of this is a perfect storm. So a perfect storm of stress and strain. And what we see is that when teachers are stressed, parents are stressed, kids are stressed, their friends are stressed. You know, everybody is so stressed. This is what's going to increase deviant behavior and that acting out. And I know some of you, you know, this is not new information, right? But just like when, you know, kind of the old story of coming home from work and being mad at somebody at work, so you kick the dog. You know, when we're stressed out, we take that aggression out on other people. And this is even easier to do because of the internet. And what, I mean, why is that? Well, it's because the internet kind of lessens that social interaction. So I can't see somebody's physical or facial response to a text message that I send. And I may not really be aware of how hurtful the things that I'm saying are to somebody else. It also, the internet lowers inhibitions. So the things that we would do in the real world, we are more likely to be able to do them online because again, it's lacking that inhibition. So I may not want to say something to somebody face to face because I would be afraid of the repercussions, but I can say it online and I don't have to worry about, again, the repercussions of that, or at least that immediate repercussion. Also, the accessibility to other like-minded people. This is good and bad, right? So you might have students that like Thinspiration was a hashtag for a while on Instagram where people were posting very skinny, anorexic images. Hashtag thigh gap was another one. And so now you're also seeing this movement where we are more easily able to find other individuals that might think the same way as we do, which might then lead to misinformation, fake news, sharing of fake news, for instance. And so I think that this also is problematic. It's also a good thing though, right? So if you have a student who is maybe LGBTQ plus, and they are exploring their identity, and the best way for them to do that might be, again, through that kind of virtual self, right? And exploring the ideal self online, because in the real world, they can't do that. And so this accessibility to other like-minded people can be good or bad. So it's you know, good to think about that. Also decreases boundaries, and boundaries meaning international, moral, and cultural. So again, the things that you wouldn't do in the real world, you more easily can do online. And anonymity is a huge component of this. Again, it is easy for us to have that pseudo anonymity or that feeling like that de-individualization occurs. And so I am no longer, you know, an individual. I am just a person on the internet, and I can do and say whatever I want. And there's a sense of kind of freedom in that. And also I guess a lack of control in what you would actually do in the real world. Okay, so what can we do, right? Like this is the really important part of this. So parents and educators, set expectations immediately. One of the most important things. And I know at Purdue, we were really concerned about students refusing to wear masks on campus, for example. And our president has done an incredible job of setting the example from the beginning. Also setting the example that if a pledge was violated, students have been expelled or suspended. And I know in my classroom, I told students that if they didn't follow the rules from day one, class would get canceled and everybody got a 0 because one person violated the rule. And so I made it very much about, and kind of, we're all in this together. And I think that that's really important. And I think students get that. I think they recognize that this is for the greater good and that utilitarian perspective. And this is a chance for them to see that in action. So set those expectations immediately. Talk about the good behavior that is being expected and what the consequences are going to be if they misuse technology. I think it's also important to talk about netiquette, you know, the ways in which we should use technology and how to be appropriate online, and also what it means to be a good digital citizen. And with that, I think you can also let them know that you get it, right? I already kind of mentioned this before. Let them know that you get it, you understand. Again, I tell my students every week when I see them that I know exactly how they're feeling. I am just as burned out, but we're in this together and we're going to get through this because that's what we do. And finally, I think you can empower students. And what I mean by that is let them know that they have choices in every decision that they make, and connect those choices to the way they communicate and the way they connect with others. So whether they're thinking before they send a text or feeling empowered to take action as a bystander and report an incident of cyberbullying, I think it's really important to let students know that they are in control. This is one of the few things that they can control in 2020, right? And I'm a certified yoga instructor. And so this is something I always talk about, is how We in yoga, we talk about the ability to control the things that we can control, right? And then to let everything else go. We cannot control the murder hornets, the fires in Australia. We can't control the hurricanes. We can't control all of these crazy things that are happening right now. But what we can control is how we respond to it. And we always get to decide whether we respond to something in a positive way or whether we respond to something external to us in a negative way. And again, I think that allows students to be empowered and take back some of that uncertainty that they might be feeling right now. And again, think about this as an all for one and one for all, and help the students understand that they're not alone and that they can reach out and give them those resources and let them know that if they feel like someone's being cruel online, allow them to bring that up in some way or be able to report that information. So empowering the bystander. Now, this brings me to my next point, is that the fact that people don't report cyberbullying is our fault. It is our fault that students are not willing to come forward and let us know that they've been the victim or that they have seen cyberbullying occurring. And this occurs for a number of reasons. It's because we are inconsistent and we're biased in the way that we respond. And it's also because students don't want their technology taken away. And so there's this idea that all you have to do is say, well, turn off your cell phone or turn off your computer or block that friend. And now all of a sudden the problem is gone. And it's much greater than that. As we all know, this isn't a technology problem. It's a technology use problem. And so we need to stop blaming technology and instead blame the way that technology is being used. And we also need to, again, check ourselves and look at how our bias comes into play here. And so bias is really an umbrella term that we talk about when it comes to stereotypes and prejudice. And there's two types of bias. One of the biases is explicit. Now, these are the bias that we are very aware of. And so if you feel a certain way towards a certain group of people, this is your conscious bias. The implicit bias is what we're talking about today. This is the bias that we have subconsciously. We're not necessarily aware of it because we aren't explicit about it. And what's ironic is that bias, it actually contradicts how we actually feel. And so we may not think we're biased, but our reactions and the ways in which we behave contradict that. And so that's what we mean by it's implicit. We're completely unaware that we might be judging certain situations as more or less of an example of cyberbullying. And a lot of times this is based on our previous experiences, which we know, again, can be biased. So here's a vignette, a study that I conducted, and I'll kind of take a second to read this to you guys. So a kid creates a video which calls another kid various names, like ugly and stupid. The video is uploaded to YouTube from the creator's home computer. Both kids are students at the same high school. The target is offended and hurt by the name calling in the video, but decides just to ignore it. So if you became aware of this, if somebody else was a bystander and reported this, would you consider this to be a form of cyberbullying? So this is one of the questions that I asked in the study. And then what I did was to test our biases. So I went a step further and I said, okay, let me manipulate the way in which the vignette appears to somebody. So I manipulated the situation, whether or not the instigator was male or female, whether the victim was male or female, whether the instigator was older or younger, and then also whether the victim was older or younger. And then also I looked at your dispositional or my dispositional bias, whether or not we're male and female. I did not include non-binary here, whether or not we're male and female, and also whether or not we're a parent. And is that going to influence the way in which we would evaluate this type of situation? And here are the scary statistics, and I'll kind of walk you guys through this. So on the kind of left here, where it's a main effect for sex. So what this says is if you are male, you in general were pretty, it was all over the board. So the girl bullying a girl, you rated that the lowest compared to a boy bullying a girl. Whereas if you look at being a female, females were more likely to see them as being a bit more equivalent. It didn't appear that the victim's gender or the instigator's gender really played a role here. But in general, we would say that women viewed these situations as more likely to be cyberbullying compared to men, in that their scores were slightly higher. Now we can look at the main effect. And so what we see here is that what's interesting is that if you are a parent, regardless if you're a parent or not, the boy bullying a girl, everybody agreed on that. That was the highest. And then what was the lowest, though, is again, girls bullying girls. And I think that comes to that idea of, mean girls, right? Girls are just mean. And again, that's that bias that we have, that implicit bias, that it's just mean girl behavior. It's not cyberbullying. So I think it's important, again, to look at that. We then looked at what's called an interaction. So all this means is that we take into account whether the parent, the sex of the instigator and victim, played a role. And we also looked at the actual, whether you're male or female. And so for the first one, this is just for the men in the study. Look at how close the scores are for if you are not a parent. If you are not a parent and you're male, you basically scored it much lower, right? But if you are a parent, you are all over the board. And in fact, you again viewed the highest one being a boy bullying a girl. And if you were a male parent, you saw girls bullying girls the lowest. So again, our bias is coming in here, our implicit bias. Oh, and then on the other screen, for women, we actually see that if you are a parent, the scores were more similar. So this is actually opposite of what men experience. So it's just showing you, again, that we may not realize that being a parent or being male and female, or whether or not the victim is male or female, or the instigator is male or female, we might be viewing these situations differently. And finally, we looked at younger and older. And so what we found based on if you are a parent on that left part is that you scored these as non-bullying, but if you were a parent, you scored them as bullying. So again, you were, regardless of whether it was an older or younger victim or instigator, if you're a parent, you scored it higher. And same thing here for women. Women scored it higher than the men did. So again, our gender bias is coming in as well. So this brings me to victim blaming, another topic that I'm super passionate about. Victim blaming is all about vulnerability. And it's this idea that victims threaten the just world belief. So we believe that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And that we don't want to violate that, right? It's really scary to think anybody could be the victim of a behavior, right? That anybody can go online and be bullied. Anybody could go online and be cyberbullied. But instead, we don't like that. We like to believe that there's a reason why that victim was chosen, and that's why I would never be a victim. And that's where that control comes in. We use victim blaming as a way to control what happens around us. Some of the phrases, right? Karma, what goes around comes around. And so that's, again, coming back to the blaming of the victim. And it's some examples of this. One of the best examples is Amanda Todd. Amanda Todd gets blamed because she flashed a camera and somebody called a capper captured that image of her. And so they blame everything that happened to her based on that one moment when somebody, an adult, tricked her into flashing the camera, and then he took a screen capture of it. She probably was completely unaware that that was even capable. Again, not aware of how technology can be used. But cappers are very good at targeting vulnerable people online and tricking them in a way in which they can then get sexually explicit images. And so again, we don't talk about the capper. We don't put any blame on him. What ends up happening is that we blame her, or we blame her parents for giving her a webcam in the first place. We blame her parents for not monitoring her behavior and how she was using the webcam. And so again, I think it's really important for us to kind of recognize that this is what I tell my students, very normal. We all do this. Victim blaming is a natural response that we have. It's a coping mechanism. But again, I think it's important for us, if we are aware of it, then we can take a step back before we might hurt a victim even more. And this is again why people don't come forward when they have experienced cyberbullying or other forms of cyber aggression online. And finally, kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about is self-cyberbullying. And so self-cyberbullying is also referred to as digital self-harm. It's a form of self-injury where individuals intentionally make hurtful comments about themselves online. And they usually do this through an anonymous platform. So they might create a fake or anonymous Facebook page or a social media account, and they use that account to then bully themselves online. And this sounds new, but it's not. It was actually first coined in 2011. In that study, they found that 9% of individuals admitted to posting a mean comment about themselves online, which at this time Englander called self-cyberbullying. In 2017, 5,000 students were sampled. And in this research study, they found that 6% of them had admitted to anonymously posting something about themselves online that was mean. And so a little bit later, New Zealand in 2019 followed up and found that 9% of boys and 7% of girls admitted to recently posting anonymous negative comments about themselves online. So again, why would somebody do this, right? And we have a couple of explanations. Obviously, one of them is going to be self-hate related to more mental illness issues, depression. We also actually looked at bipolar disorder, as NSSI or non-suicidal self-injury is also related to bipolar disorder. It's also a form of manipulation. And so what we saw was that some individuals did it to see if their friends would back them up, right? If somebody posts something mean online, is my friend going to swoop in and then, post a comment that makes it, or that says, stop being mean to her, she's beautiful, right? Or he's beautiful. And so that's one thing, is to kind of test who your real friends are, which is much more of a manipulative sort of traits. And the other reason is sad fishing. And so sad fishing is a term that we refer to when people make exaggerated kind of claims online and they're looking for sympathy from other people. And again, sad fishing could be a form of manipulation, but it could also be a cry for help, depending on, again, the initial motivation of that individual. And so a few things with self-cyberbullying. The question is it related to non-suicidal self-injury or NSSI? And so again, NSSI refers to intentional injuring of oneself without the intention to die. Traditional forms of kind of self-harm include intentionally cutting parts of the body. So we call that self-mutilation. A more layman's term would be cutters. And again, you see a lot of social media trends related to this as well. And so kind of thinking back to how this ties into creating your actual ideal and ought self. And other examples of this would be preventing wounds from healing, picking at your skin, maybe repeatedly banging your head or banging a part of your body to cause bruising. It could also mean using cigarettes to cause burns on your body. So what my graduate student did was he examined this question, right? He wanted to know, are people who engage in NSSI also more likely to engage in digital self-harm, right? Posting comments online about themselves that are negative. And again, they do this anonymously, so it's not clear who it is that's making the post. And we conducted this study in March, which was horrible timing because obviously we were running the study with freshmen at Purdue. And it was interesting because we were, again, freshmen, they're 18 years of age, around 18. They are considered young people. They're still teenagers in a way. And so we know that NSSI is prevalent amongst teens, and that's why we picked freshmen. It's also an easier sample than conducting research with high school students. And so when we engaged in this research, COVID shut down the university, and now you see stress at an all-time high. And so this wasn't an ideal situation to be collecting the data, but what we found is that 15% of our sample self-reported engaging in at least one type of digital self-harm. On average, they engaged in 2 types. And of the 112 freshmen that did answer the survey, we also found that over half of them reported at least one NSSI. So again, we don't know if these numbers are a lot higher than traditionally. And we think it's because, again, due to COVID and the stress that the students were under. But we did find a significant correlation so that if an individual engaged in NSSI, they were also more likely to engage in digital self-harm. And we also found that females were also more likely to do both compared to male students. And so overall, I think that digital self-harm is something that, yes, they're related to NSSI, and this needs to be another type of cyberbullying that we talk about when it comes to, educating parents and educating, students and teachers about really the different ways in which cyber aggression occurs, and that cyber aggression can occur against yourself. So some final thoughts here. Woo, there you go. That was too fast. So cyberbullying is increased due to stress and strain. So that's why we're seeing an increase during this crazy 2020 time. But again, I think the one thing that we can take away here is that we can empower our students, and we can let them know that the thing that they can control is the way in which they respond to external stimuli. And the way they respond could always be positive or negative, and they get to make that decision. And I think that's one way in which we can empower students. We have implicit bias. We need to avoid that as much as we can, especially so we can empower students to feel comfortable coming to us when they report cyberbullying. And we kind of get rid of some of those, generalizations like mean girl behavior. We all are guilty of victim blaming. And again, being aware of this can allow us to stop doing those judgments. And finally, cyberbullying is real. And I think it's incredibly important that we start adding that in when we have conversations about cyberbullying in general. All right, I think I finished with, plenty of time for questions. Love to.
And we have a lot of questions. So
thank
you.
Fantastic. Great. Hopefully I didn't go too fast.
It was great.
I do want to ping. So cyberbullying.org is a incredible research center out of Florida that some colleagues of mine run. And they have great resources for educators and teachers on everything from sexting to cyberbullying to bystander. And so please, if, dive into that material. It's free, and I would highly recommend it. It's based on research. And so it's empirically based evidence. And I always try to push that as much as I can. So.
Yeah. Samir and Justin are great guys.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Totally know who they are. They're fantastic.
Guys, totally know. So I think that, like I said earlier, when I got involved in this in 2003, my son passed away in 2002 after a hazing incident. The whole issue of cyber back then was, we don't need to worry about it. And actually, that's one of our questions. So I'll start with one of most hated things I hear.
Okay.
Is what do we do about, how do we report cyberbullying when the school says it didn't happen in school? And it's very different. Yeah, that's the expression.
Wow.
And especially, this is different now that we're, in the time of COVID, and we are all remote, but definitely your school really should be paying attention to issues of cyberbullying. It goes back to what Owen was talking about in your school policy. You need to look at your school policy as to what they say about cyberbullying.
Yes, and also knowing if it's on campus or off campus. And again, cyberbullying.org actually has an updated map for that. So, you can quickly kind of dive into what your state's policies are. And again, the schools might be different, but it's pretty stressful when you feel like an incident has occurred and there's no support there for you to be able to report it.
Yeah. And for me, it's disheartening to hear this 17 years later, that we're still have the kind of the same excuse when we have such great resources out there to help move us forward. So with parents and teachers being home, how much is too much attention for their child to be paying attention to Zoom in school, and how often should a parent be checking in on their student?
So this is always the question or the answer that my students give me, and I tell them I hate it. It depends, right? So it depends on your student. I mean, hopefully you have developed a fantastic relationship with your child, with your student, and what behaviors are normal and what behaviors are not normal. And so I think that that's one of the big things is checking out for those red flags. Is your student or is your child hiding the technology? Are they not allowing you to take a peek at it? Are they not answering questions? Do they only want to use it when you're not you're kind of not in the room? And that behavior is new, right? That behavior's recently changed. Did they stop talking about a friend, right? Maybe their best friend Antonia was the person they were hanging out with, and now all of a sudden they don't talk about Antonia anymore, and they won't really tell you what's going on. And so I think that it's all about communication and keeping those lines open, and not being willing to just accept it's fine kind of. And I think parents being willing to say, well, this is how I'm feeling and I'm not feeling fine. I'm feeling really stressed as well. And like I said, I've been really open with my students about how I'm doing and how I'm coping. And I think that that's made it a much more realistic process for them as well.
Right. And since you are, this is also in your area, Tristan is asking about the legality around cyberbullying. What about criminal charges? And does the knowing that there are criminal charges, does that dissuade some of the bad behaviors? I know here in Michigan, we recently passed a cyberbullying law. And so again, your area.
So what I will say is that if we look at traditional deterrence theory from, a sociological perspective, it doesn't work, right? Simply having laws isn't what's going to keep somebody from not doing a behavior. So it needs to be much more of an intrinsic, I don't want to do this behavior because I recognize it's wrong, and not because I have an external force like the legal system, right? A formal social norm telling me that I shouldn't be doing this. And again, a lot of what we see too is with policies is that it's the school disruptance policy. And so the schools are the ones that are making determinations, maybe not necessarily like a formal legal process as well. And so again, this becomes much more convoluted. But I would traditionally, I think, again, knowing that this could be punishable might stop some people. But I think that this needs to be, as it always has been, a grassroots effort where the people that we are raising recognize that this is something that they no longer want to be a part of their culture, right, or their experience.
And do you, from your research and the work being done even through the Cyberbullying Research Center, do we kind of know the breakdowns or percentage of grade levels where digital harm is most prevalent? Is it something that's more in middle school, or is it moving to high school? And is it also broke down amongst ethnic and cultural groups?
Yeah, so this is really new. So there's only been those 3 studies that I mentioned, besides my my student's thesis, which I'm absolutely happy to share with anybody who's interested. It's a thesis is a very long document, so I'll give you the highlights and tell you what to read. But it is, we don't know a lot about this. It's almost one of those things where it also, and this is with cyberbullying in general, our understanding of the prevalence of it is so inconsistent because of the way we define it, right? And what I found I didn't show you the other vignettes that I used in my study, but the more that the victim was upset about it, the more likely you were to say it was cyberbullying, which I don't think is a way to judge a situation, right? And so everybody agreed that when the victim committed suicide, everybody said that was cyberbullying. But the exact same scenario, if I had a different outcome, I said maybe they switched schools or that they just stopped talking to that friend. People were all over the board whether they thought it was cyberbullying. And I don't think that that's fair, right? I don't think it should rely on how the victim responds to it and whether or not we view that as a cyberbullying incident. And so I think that that's also something to think about too.
Yeah, I think the blaming the victim is always kind of been with us and will be for a while until we keep having these conversations that no, there are so many different factors. I did have a question. I was looking for, I can't catch your name, but it was an interesting question is that, here it is. This is from Susan, what can students who are cyberbullies do to empower students who are currently going through it?
Okay, say that again. So what
it's what can students who are cyberbullies, maybe she meant cyberbullied, but it goes both ways.
Okay, cyberbullied.
Yeah. Do to empower students who are currently going through it?
Oh my gosh. I always feel like the best thing that we can do is share our story. So if a student is willing to say again and that's allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, that this happened to me, I know how you're feeling, and this is, maybe this is who I talked to. This is the teacher that I reported it to, or this is the support system. And again, we don't want everybody to be a bystander, because we know that not all students may feel equipped to do that. So we shouldn't expect everybody to be willing to stand up and say something, but we should be able to at least give them the skills and the option to do so. And so again, I think that that's really one way to do that. And again, I think the most powerful thing is to let somebody know that they're not alone.
Exactly. So to wrap up before we get to the next one, this has been great. I can talk with you on this topic a long time. For where we're at now and where we've been with cyberbullying, all the work we've done, how long is it going to take us to kind of get back out of this hole with the pandemic and use of technology? Do you feel it's kind of put us back a little bit and we're going to have to kind of rework and continue to move forward?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that's what makes this world so interesting, right? Or the world of technology is that we might get over this hurdle, but then something else is going to happen. And so then we'll have to adjust to that. And again, I think as much as we're talking about how hard this is for our students right now, I think it's going to build resilience for sure. And again, I think we do that by reminding them that, you know, they're stronger than they realize, and that we are all in this together. And it's sort of that that utilitarian, you know, perspective. And I think that that's important, and maybe we don't have that as much here in the States compared to other cultures, right? Where we're very individualistic here. And this might be that situation where we really get to bring people together and say that it's all for one and one for all, and we're all going to do this together. And I think that that's going to be the lesson that the students have.
I agree. And Kathryn, thank you for your work in what I think is one of the most important areas of, you know, bullying prevention that we can look at. And
thank you so much.
Technology is, the Pandora's box was open. So now we all have to kind of work as much as we can to not put it back in, but how do we deal with it now that it's out? So thank you for your ongoing work, and everybody online, go to the Cyberbullying Research Center. There's a lot of information there as well. Talk to your kids, you know, look over their shoulder, make sure you're looking at their primary Facebook, not the secondary one that they don't show you.
Exactly.
There's all kinds of things that are happening, but this has been great. Kathryn, thank you so very much.